We wanted to bring you some breaking news out of India and China. So obviously there was a huge scuffle between the Indian and the Chinese military up in the northern part of the border in a disputed zone, which they've clashed over for many years. However, we're learning that for the first time in almost 40 years, blood was actually spilt, with the Indian army saying that 20 soldiers were killed in a clash with Chinese troops along that disputed border. The Chinese government has not yet released the number of their own casualties, holding that number very tightly, though the Indian government says that they did occur. The details of the clash are stunning. Weapons are not involved, so they're not actually allowed to carry guns at this border zone specifically in order to reduce tensions. NPR's Morning Edition had some reporting from India with additional details, absolutely stunning, about the actual clash itself. Let's take a listen.
We do know it was hand-to-hand combat with stones and wooden clubs because they have this agreement not to carry guns in that border zone. An Indian army colonel is among the dead. India has been building a road in the area that could be used to deploy future troops more quickly. China may see that as a provocation. Both sides have been pouring in more troops and building more infrastructure there recently, and so that's led to some scuffles in recent weeks. There have also been some high-level military talks as recently as last weekend, actually, to try to diffuse tensions. But, the opposite appears to have happened.
I mean, just
Crazy.
Wild to hear that. Stones and wooden clubs. I mean,
with
that
nails
is
attached to them.
Personal, in your face. And as you said, we don't know how many casualties there were on the Chinese side. The Chinese government hasn't released it. The Indian media is reporting 43 casualties, including deaths. We don't know if that is accurate or not. But just to be clear, there are probably more deaths than the 20 Indian soldiers that we know about. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is out with a statement this morning saying the sovereignty and integrity of India is supreme and nobody can stop us in defending that. India wants peace, but if provoked, India is capable of giving a befitting reply. And Saagar, it's a little bit of a tough situation for Modi, who's part of his popularity is this muscular strength. But China is much larger military, so Modi does not actually want a conflict with China and has apparently faced criticism locally for taking so long in order to come out with any sort of statement whatsoever.
Yeah, this isn't India-Pakistan, right? Which is that, there's a very traditional playbook that gets followed there. These are the two largest powers in all of Asia. One's a massive military power, and India itself, of course, it's not as big as China in terms of military power, but it's still a significant power on its own right. And this border dispute goes back so many years.
Yeah,
and
decades.
Literally, they fought a war over it. Nothing was really resolved. The entire situation is a tinderbox because you have two nuclear-armed countries, the two largest populations on Earth, going at it above 15,000 feet or however high it is up in the middle of the Himalaya mountains. It's kind of a crazy story, and I think we should all be very worried about it because the border dispute and the way of saving face that China and India are both going to have, you can see that Modi gave himself a bit of an out because he said, quote, if provoked.
Right.
So not saying that this was the provocation. We are capable of giving a reply. We'll see what the Chinese do. But Xi Jinping is in his own thing because Xi Jinping and much of Chinese nationalism and the Made in China 2025 and all of that is all about restoring the robustness of the Chinese state to the great imperial glory before the West was involved in that region. So both leaders find themselves in a bit of an untenable situation, and the opportunity for escalation is very high.
Yeah.
But neither of these people want to go to war.
They don't want to go to war.
Over a border dispute in the middle of an economic crisis and a pandemic.
Right.
So.
Well, and we do have a little bit of video of what some of this scuffling looked like, just sort of to get a little bit of a sense of how, how personal and in your face this is, sort of posturing and pushing each other right here. Obviously, this is not any of the fatalities that we're seeing. And you are right to point out the elevation here. I mean, that's part of why there are likely so many fatalities from rocks and wooden clubs, which is insane. You see some more footage here of that kind of melee. We do have a statement from China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who says the Indian side must not misjudge the current situation and must not underestimate China's firm will to safeguard territorial sovereignty. So nothing from Xi Jinping, but from the foreign minister that we see here. And like you said, both sides sort of trying to project strength.
Yes.
while giving themselves an out so that they can avoid a direct conflict.
And that's actually the biggest problem that they have. I mean, and China, we should be clear, is seems to be one of the main provocateurs here, bringing in like armored personnel carriers and all these other equipment into the disputed border zone. That is what seems to have sparked some of these confrontations. But it just goes to show how the tensions that are all around this in this area can always explode, and that India, Modi himself facing a domestic political turmoil because of coronavirus. I mean, it's the same here, right? But except it's got 1 billion people.
Right.
Of an economic crisis, not being able to work. Xi Jinping himself has had real issues domestically with his handling of coronavirus. Right now in Beijing, they canceled all schools and flights going in and out of the city because of a spike in cases. Things are not going well there. So Wuhan still has its own problems right now. So we need to remember that both of these leaders have their own domestic political problems, and that when escalating tensions are going up, as much as they don't want anything in order to happen, they face a lot of pressure in order to save national face.
They don't want to appear weak. They don't want a war, but they also don't want to appear weak, and that creates a somewhat volatile situation.
Right. So we're going to stay on top of the story. I mean, for some reason, I see it being ignored by some of the biggest media outlets in the world. This is dramatically important. 2 nuclear-armed powers, 2 of the biggest populations in the world. So we'll continue to bring you guys updates.
More Rising for you after this.